A death of music journalism conversation. Hi, everyone. Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. You may have heard the shocking news that has been taking the music discourse world by storm. Internet music journalism pioneers Pitchfork.com have announced a new paywall model for their website, something that has not gotten the most positive of receptions. People have been saying everything from Pitchfork is shooting itself in the foot here to why would you ever propose this? Pitchfork isn't even worth the pixels it's printed on. Regardless of your opinion of Pitchfork's music review quality, though, part of me does wonder whether or not this reaction is partially coming from a place of entitlement. You're making it harder for us to repost your scores on social media and complain about them. Because, I don't know, apparently there still are going to be aspects of the website that will be freely available. And if it is true that everybody bitching and complaining about this change cares about Pitchfork as little as they claim to, then I don't foresee anybody going over what Pitchfork has said is an allotted 4 reviews a month, which you can read and peruse and see the score on before you're limited and put behind a paywall. Still, this is a pretty massive change from one of the biggest voices in music reviewing, which is why I thought this was a greater conversation that required another voice, that of Toronto-based music journalist and writer Emilie. So here's our awesome conversation on this topic right now. And as I said, here we have Emilie with us for this conversation. I'm sure you have been seeing some of the responses to this announcement on the Pitchfork paywall, among other things. It's been pretty negative, obviously, but in your opinion, is it in any way over the top?
The reaction, I think like twofold. Like I see the reaction, I get why it's negative. I think the packaging of this messaging is the problematic aspect. But when I was kind of combing through the comment sections, and I should do that, but I was deep in them, I think that what I want to push against is the backlash being about paying it all. I think that the gut reaction to have a problem with paying for this content in music journalism is something I think we need to check ourselves and check each other with. I think that I do have a problem with, for sure. I think that we need to get used to the idea of starting to pay for music journalism. It's only going to become increasingly popular. That's, if we want it to stay alive, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah, without pointing fingers any more than is necessary, the unfortunate downstream effect of Pitchfork kind of rolling out this idea, because in concept, I echo a lot of what you're saying here. It's not in concept a bad idea, but the downstream effect of Pitchfork kind of rolling out the idea badly is that it potentially sours general music fans on the idea across the board. And on top of it, if there are other websites or publications who are considering the same thing, who might be in a worse position than Pitchfork, because we're not talking about platforms that have Condé Nast backing. They themselves may also be sort of like afraid to make the jump and build a platform that might be long-term workable for their writers, because they're afraid, well, what happens to Pitchfork? What if that reaction is thrown our way?
Yeah, and I think that context, the Condé Nast context is so important, because I think a really easy parallel we can make is like Stereogum. And last year, Stereogum, the editor wrote like a really honest and direct piece of we're relaunching our paywall. This is why we're doing it. These are all the new features you're going to get. This is how it's going to improve your life. Common access was one of the features that Stereogum listed in this paywall too, but it was packaged so differently under the guise of like, music journalism is under threat. We need you to help us stay alive. Like, it was that direct. And I think that was helpful. And for the people who want to feed into these outlets and want to support them, I think that we respond well to. I think we respond less well to, here is $5 a month. That's a negligible amount, we could say arguably, but you're paying so that you can get the comment access, period, and not really much else is added to it. I think that was a real miss that, to your point, it's going to be hard for them to regain the traction if they do make adjustments, which I think that they might actually, because I think the blurring of the score, I think some of those approaches, they're just not going to work out, but it's going to be hard.
Going back to Stereogum, who, we've referenced multiple times before on the site. We even had Chris DeVille on here recently talking about his, new book, which is great. Another sort of like aspect of, I think, what makes the I guess, pitch of donating, paying for stereo gum a little bit more of an easier pill to swallow is that over the years, with them kind of like starting out in the music blog format, they have kind of built a little bit of a community around what they do. And there's sort of like, you know, a little fandom for the writers and the curation and just the general voice of the site that, you know, a small but passionate group of people like really care about. Whereas like Pitchfork, as, you know, DIY as they were at one point, as, you know, homegrown as they were at one point, as being like one of the pioneers of like internet journalism as we know it, along with, I guess, like, you know, the old guard of music journalism, if you want to call it that, they very much still wrote from like kind of an ivory tower kind of voice. And I think that kind of prevented people, regardless of what you agree with or disagree with on the site, prevented them from sort of like creating an intimate relationship with the brand that kind of makes it difficult to sort of like see what you're paying for or something that you're like investing in because, oh yeah, I'm like a part of this, in the same way that maybe a stereo gum reader or viewer might think of donating to that platform.
Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way from like Ryan Schreiber launching Pitchfork in his Minneapolis basement, right? And I think what is interesting to me about that, though, is that was 30 years ago, 1996. If you've been a reader for a large fraction or any fraction of those years, it means that you've been supporting Pitchfork along its evolution, its developments, its changes. And yes, there have been many in tone and otherwise. But so for someone to come forward and say, like, I've been supporting you for this many years for free. And now when I'm being asked, 20, 30 years later to pay, I'm saying, no, thank you. So I understand that the fan bases and those connections and relations maybe aren't as strong as with an indie publication. But I would say that this argument that people tend to sweepingly make about Pitchfork these days, where they don't have great writers, that they don't have like solid music criticism, I think that is a kind of, I wonder how many of the people saying that, and you're entitled to your opinion, are the people who see that number score, 7.6, this person is a terrible person, I want you to die, I'm getting into your troll comments, I'm going to dox you, like, versus people who are truly engaging with the journalism, which is what is trying to be protected right now. So I think it's a really interesting contrast because they are blurring the one thing that typically gets the trolls going, which is that circle and that number. And often people stop there, and that has sort of created an entirely new discourse around what Pitchfork is, who writes for Pitchfork, and sometimes that's accurate, sure. But sometimes I think that narrative about Pitchfork is a little false, actually, and unfair.
I'm experiencing it myself to some degree. I will say there is, like, I think this growing issue around any and all music discourse around Pitchfork and otherwise, where we just sort of like accept the prevailing negative narratives that are spun on platforms like Twitter, which is famously negative in regards to everything, paint people's public perception of everything. I mean, playing devil's advocate, obviously there were some negative takes and responses about this whole rollout on Instagram too, but still, with that being said, what I found increasingly these days when I meet music fans face to face, and you would think maybe I'd have a few more negative interactions than I have, given some of the receptions of the things that I've said online. I mean, I'm sure you've seen them, but for the most part, like, it seems like normal, average, everyday music fans have taken more to seeking out more personal and communal IRL experiences with the music that they care about, and are spending less time online getting punished by the most sycophantic among us that just have very strong opinions because they want to passionately defend their favorite artist. And, the thing is, like, again, for your average music fan, they don't have the time. And, because they're not sort of like, invested in whether or not a certain album gets a 9.0 or above, as maybe another person does who might not have anything better to do with their day. They're not spending their time sort of like, evening out the narrative or providing sort of like a voice of reason. So unfortunately, like, these super negative takes and reactions and all of this just toxicity kind of tends to paint people's worldviews of what public perception is, because most people just don't want to get in the thick of it because it's just very stressful.
Right. Yeah. And understood completely. But when you are engaging with it at an arm's length, which is totally fine to do, then the criticism that comes from that, if it's not informed, and I'm not saying you can't, as a reader of Pitchfork, you might read every review and have a negative review, and that's totally fine. But if you are going to take an arm's length distance from these things, and then to come back and say, like, you're not worth the $5, you're not worth, it's okay if you don't want to pay this money. But I think as people kind of do I don't want to say retract, kind of the opposite of retract, step into the world a little more, they want to kind of create their own communities. As you're doing that, you have to realize that all the doors of these outlets will be closing as you're doing that. And it's frog in boiling water situation. We're the frogs in the boiling water and everything is fine because you're looking around and you can go and see, free content creators on your phone. You can talk to your friends in the cafe, at the bar, whatever. That all exists. But eventually, as these doors are always closing around us and we're not paying the paywall and whatever, we are going to very quickly look up around us and realize there was no established professional music journalism or criticism around. And that, we could get into, it's a whole different conversation about how that is going to affect the ecosystem and the art that ends up getting made. It is an ecosystem. It goes around. And there was someone in my comments yesterday who called journalists parasites, like parasites of the art that is made. That is such a cynical way of looking at music journalism. It is such an integral part of the ecosystem. And this might seem like one outlet you're not supportive of and you don't care, but it's another door closing and they're all closing around us. And I don't know sometimes if people realize down the line the impact that's going to have on the music you love and the artists who need these things.
Yeah, for all of Pitchfork's flaws, I don't know if, the right reaction is just sort of like all shrug our shoulders and just be like, so what? There's other opinions elsewhere to sort of like see, because we're kind of talking about a little bit of a canary in the coal mine situation, because this would be like a really massive outlet and sort of like, standard bearer for just the concept of music criticism in general to totally die off and melt away. Right. And look, if Pitchfork were to disappear, or go completely bankrupt, the loss of that would be much greater than just simply, okay, no more reviews.
Exactly.
You're talking about a whole back catalog of different year-end lists and editorials and ratings and, all sorts of coverage of a lot of different music scenes that would just be completely melted away into nothing. And there would be nowhere else on the internet, sort of like, keeping that candle lit, as it were.
100%. Yeah. And if you think about the artists, yes, there are so many ways. Look at what you do. Look at what all of us do as content creators and music curators. Sure. But Pitchfork, think about all the artists whose careers have been broken from Pitchfork. Think about the ecosystem. Not only, okay, you have journalists losing their jobs. And I'm not saying that as a journalist, that scares shit out of me, but right. There is that reality. Then beyond that, okay, and then scenes are not being explored. So what happens to those scenes? Well, okay, the indie artists might have been gotten the best new music on Pitchfork, who then would have played a circuit of mid-size or indie venues in certain cities. They're not booking those anymore. Okay, so they're not getting the shows, they're not getting the money. That happens. That indie artist doesn't break. Your local local music scene is then affected. And I'm right. Not, to your point, it's not just Pitchfork. This is just our reaction to this. I think I'm hoping is not like emblematic of our reaction to this ongoing trend, which is music journalism is dying. They're asking us to save it, maybe not in ways that are the best format or the best communicated. But if you don't save it, you will be affected in ways that you don't want to be. I promise you, I promise.
I have my own 2 cents on this, and I'll give my thoughts too, but just to like ask you, and I'm sure there's a lot of people wondering this who are kind of skeptical of what Pitchfork is pitching as far as like a paywall model or other websites too. There was a point in time that we all hold in very vivid and recent memory where this stuff financially was stable and it did scale and it did work and it was effective and journalists were being paid and all of this stuff that you just mentioned was happening. What changed between then and now that somehow made it unviable? Are people just reading the site less? Have advertiser dollars dried up and gone somewhere else? Have audiences moved? Have the musicians moved? Like what went where to where now the stars are not lining up?
Well, I think we could just think of one example, which is everyone is saying just advertise more advertisements. Well, I'm sure everyone who uses the computer and they search something up, Google AI search, decimated. like music blogs, and I say from indie music blogs to the Pitchforks of the world, which is why, Stereo Gum say that in particular. You look something up and they've been crawling, now they're crawling all those websites and it comes up often inaccurately in that first blurb up there. So people aren't even going, the traffic is no longer going to the websites, period. So that's
AI
not
is
happening
just
in an organic way.
AI is sucking up more traffic.
And I know a lot of music journalists, and I'm in Toronto, I'm in Canada, and a lot of indie publications and blogs who are trying to figure out what to do, because not everyone, not all publications have even the option necessarily of introducing a paywall. They know that will be the end of them. They just simply don't have the pull culturally to do that. So they're trying to figure it out. And that's creating a total spin in approach to music journalism as well, across the board, in that, maybe writing news features is less going to get less eyeballs and traffic than a think piece that is harder to crawl and harder to kind of optimize by AI. So just all that to say is, like, something as simple as advertisements on a website is just not bringing in the money and traffic it used to. So, and you think about the easiest ways of getting revenue, no longer being something that you can rely on. And then you add to that the fact that, the interest in reading long form journalism, period, across the board is just not as much there anymore, because we have little rat brains that don't want to click on the link and read the actual whole piece. That adds to it too. So I think it's a combination of attention span and the culture of quick fixes, AI crawling the websites and stealing, that content and just totally driving traffic down. So yeah, it's abysmal.
Yeah, and to rewind just a second, because even before the AI stuff, there were just so many users matriculating over to social media platforms like Instagram and getting wormholed over there, to where a lot of music coverage was kind of like chasing that audience and trying to sort of like get them to come back to the websites, because it was just more convenient to stay over there, which obviously dropped down website traffic too. And, that was happening around the time that Pitchfork ended up getting kind of folded into Condé Nast. And there were all these conversations about, like, the future of the site and so on and so forth. So websites were already kind of like struggling on that front.
Yeah.
And then to also like kind of get it from the other end through Google, which for a long time has been like a guarantee in terms of like, yeah, if you look at music review, yada, 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 on Google, Pitchfork's probably going to be in the top 10 links. But then you've got like this giant AI thing in front of you now, giving most people, I guess, the answer that they want. And it's like preventing matriculation into the links below. And it's just kind of crazy to think of like Google with AI is essentially like killing all the business models and the network of websites that originally made Google popular in the first place. The whole reason search engines existed to begin with was because, well, I need a way to kind of like go through all of these websites conveniently. And, kind of like the trade-off there was like, okay, have our websites incorporated, but at least now you'll drive traffic over here and we can sort of like have advertisements on our website to sort of like pitch to those people. And that's how the business model is going to work. I wonder how much longer this can last, not even just in music journalism, but broadly, because for how many more years can websites be just sort of sucked of ad dollars due to AI, and for there to be anything for AI to even pick up anymore, maybe 5-10 years from now?
Exactly, which is why they're trying to get creative, right? And not that paywall's a creative idea, but they're trying to get creative with the way they communicate the simple reality of a paywall. Part of me wonders if they had just said, guys, we have a paywall on the website now. You have a limit of like 10 articles, like the New York Times, like the New Yorker, like every other publication. There's a certain amount you can see and there's a certain amount you can't see. I wonder how different the reaction would have been, because to your point and what we're talking about here, everything's changing. I think people are aware of that. But I think that the framing of that is unfortunate, because I think that would have allowed people to kind of see it in that way and be like, yeah, okay, now I have to just pay to access this outlet that I support. Not I have to pay specifically for this one thing. So I think sometimes that creativity of how we're going to get the money can bite you in the butt a little bit if it's not executed well, which I think is what we saw here. But also, like, to your point of what you were saying before, I think now there's a real hunger for human curator, journalist, voice person, kind of as a hub of community, where these journalists, and I actually saw with Pitchfork, they launched like a series of Pitchfork of columns with like 4 writers, Alphonse being one of them, and I could tell they were trying to make I don't say personalities for lack of a better term, but like people that fans or consumers of content and journalism could go to and be like, I want to go to that person. I like their take on that stuff, which is how music journalism used to be, right? But it's much easier when you're scrolling your TikTok feed and Anthony Fantano comes up and it's like, yeah, that's my guy. And like that's sort of what people want now. So it's hard to translate that into the written form of it, right? It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would love to, make the pitch to anybody watching this. And, obviously there's a lot of people seeing this who have exactly that same sentiment that you communicated there. Like, as much as I love what I do and I love the space that it exists in the greater world of music and music commentary, I don't think music commentary should be boiled down to simply this, like simply what I'm doing. What I do is great and I love what I do. And I think there's an effectiveness to it. And I think it holds significance, but like, it's not the same thing that a writer's room can do, that a series of writers can do that are doing pitches and features and so on and so forth, that can look at certain things either much more broadly or because of how generalist a lot of my coverage tends to be. There's a lot of journalists who are doing equally great, if not greater stuff than I am, but are never going to get the same level of shine that I do because they're just so niche and deeply into one thing. But they're able to sort of like drill down into it and cover it in a way that nobody else is because they focus on that one thing. And especially those types, like, and websites that cater to that sort of thing, be it like a resident advisor or what have you, where it's like, it's just electronic music or it's just West African music or it's just whatever, like those kinds of platforms, those are the ones that suffer the most in this dynamic because,
100%.
them you're going to run across in Google even less because there's even less search engine optimization to what they do because they're never going to talk about the new Lady Gaga record. You know what I mean?
Right.
So as a result, like if you do come across those hubs, they need the most support because they're being run across the least and they're doing some of the work that is sometimes the most thankless because they're looking up information that, only the slimmest margin of people are like interested in.
Yeah, it's such a good point because what's the first thing to get cut when media budgets are cut? I mean, it's local journalism, it's niche journalism, right? And so, but those are to your point, the hyper expertise. And I think that one of the concerns that I have when it comes to this new era we've entered, where I'm going to attach my musical identity to one person, and I'm not singling you out, I'm saying anyone, that's what we all do, is that your world becomes my world then. And anything that you're not aware of because you're a human being and how could you be aware of everything, then I'm not aware of it either. And so something like Pitchfork, and again, it's a representation, it's one example, not, the be all end all, but there are so many perspectives and they do really support a very niche, right, kind of subsect of like writers and opinions and, subcultures that no one person could ever have a grasp on. If you read every outlet in the world every single day, you couldn't. So that diversity that an outlet presents to the reader is so valuable. Whereas I think the tie that people get to a human face, it's often they have their one or two people. Do you know what I mean? And no matter how wonderful those people are, you just lose a lot. A lot of sand kind of falls through your fingers. It's inevitable.
Yeah. To further drill down on like what I was saying, there's a lot of people who comment on what I do. Given if they're not looking to discredit it, who will often sort of like reference like, oh, wow, he comes across like really knowledgeable on this topic or that topic or this other topic. And, usually 9 times out of 10, it's because I'm reading research other people have done. The only reason that I'm able to get you a review on like, let's say, a really cool classic city pop album and get that done in 3 days is because somebody else spent 3 years or more sort of like obsessing over it in a way that nobody else was going to. And, large journalism networks and websites are exactly the kinds of places that like keep people like that, in towed and employed and, sort of on staff to, call on them to cover this or that's sort of like in their wheelhouse.
It's interesting because I wonder if like you spoke to the people who were like, and I got this so much in my inbox and comments yesterday was, oh, I've got you, or I've got other people, like I'm good. And I wonder if we sat down and we said, okay, let's trace the web. So let's say it's me. Let's say it's me. You got me, so you feel like you're covered. Well, I use Pitchfork. I subscribe to Pitchfork and Stereo Gum and music blogs from all around the world, and I'm reading them, and I'm, voraciously all the time, and I'm so grateful to those minds. And so if I didn't have that and that exposure, I would be presenting you with different things. So I feel like people don't make that connection. They think it's like, I'm good, I've got what I need kind of thing. But
it's because everything is so atomized now. Everything is so atomized, and nobody sees how the sausage is made. So they think they think it, even in the music space, even though many of us are all watching each other and reading each other, they think everybody's acting completely independently, and everything everyone is saying is just like completely just like come up in their own head, when again, like, we're all cultural commentators. Like, the whole reason that we do what we do is because we're paying attention to what everybody is saying and what's going on. You know?
This is an ecosystem. A really important animal or tree is going extinct. Let's think about it that way. That's bad. Let's panic, because if that is not existing in the ecosystem, a biologist could make a way better analogy than I am right now. But, then what happens to the rest of the ecosystem? Not good. It's not good. And I think that connectivity, to your point, when we're so atomized, we don't see the ecosystem aspect of it. And this is like how we all survive and thrive. Survive is really the word now. They're just trying to survive. This is a Hail Mary, but yeah.
So yeah, regardless of what anybody is kind of like coming away from, this with in terms of like a perspective or a take specifically on the Pitchfork paywall rollout, you can certainly have, your criticisms of that specifically. But like, I do think, like what you were saying, like, we do need to sort of like slowly warm up to the idea that the future of music journalism itself is like very much in the balance. And, I think if people care about commentary and care about the ability to be aware of what's out there that's actually interesting and it's actually challenging and artful, supporting it in some form or fashion is going to be necessary, because, just think about through what mechanisms you will be delivered music in the future if all of it goes away. Like, it's pretty much just pretty much going to be from then on forward, PR people, labels, and Spotify algorithms deciding what you're going to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's literally it. And that's literally it. And, if there is some cool, interesting variation in there, it's going to be based on maybe classic albums that were forged during a time when music criticism did exist, which is probably why they're actually cool and good, because they've already been proven to be cash cows. You'll probably be recommended that stuff. But outside of that, as far as anything new, it will be the most low-grade, replayable slop that you 100%. Could possibly ever imagine, because all that matters in the streaming age and all that scales in the streaming age is just whatever you can replay over and over and over.
Exactly. It's for passive consumption. It's increasingly not even made by a human being. And if you compare or contrast the amount of music that is being made today, tens of thousands of songs being uploaded to a streaming app every day, and then you contrast that to the threat of the death of journalism and music journalism. So there's more and more music being made, and there's less and less people sifting through it, covering it, and analyzing it, sharing it. That is a very bad contrasting reality, right? Because what will result is that we are completely inundated by what the corporate powers that be want us to be inundated with. And you think it's hard to break through as an artist now? Try breaking through as an artist when there's not a human being. I point to myself. It could be any music journalist who believes in you, who saw you in that club, around the corner of their house the other night, and is taking you and pitching you to Pitchfork or whoever it may be. It's going to be impossible.
And finally, and I've made this point before, I'm sure there will be some people who react to what you've just said there and say, well, maybe I don't need to worry about any of this because, like, I've got my community either on Reddit, on Twitter, on wherever. Like, I know who my favorite accounts are, and we all sort of like talk about our 3, 4, 5 favorite bands or stan accounts and that sort of thing. Like, that's my tribe. That's the people who I hang out with to sort of like hear about the music that I want to hear. Or I follow this account or that account. And you don't think a lot of these accounts are either botted or behind the scenes getting paid by the label to post this or that or the third thing and say, oh, actually, this is pretty great. Check this out. Like, I've seen and have been witness to so many astroturfed music campaigns on Twitter at this point. I literally get the emails from any number of labels that are like, hey, will you react to this song on TikTok? And I mean, I'll say no, but then it just so happens a week later, I'll see that song getting posted by 100%. XYZ account on Twitter saying, hey guys, have you heard this? It's pretty good. And there's like, you know, several other botted accounts saying, oh yeah, I think it's pretty great too. And all of a sudden that manufactures enough consent for people to kind of look at it and be like, is this actually like pretty good? Seems like it's kind of buzzing. Like, that model is so easily subverted in the totally faceless, anonymous, you know, social media landscape that we're existing in right now. And I don't think people are fully aware of it.
I don't think at all. I try to tell people as much as possible. You know, I understand labels are doing what they got to do, but like, will you talk about this song and pretend you love it for what's your rate? And I do not do that. I know you don't. I do not do that either. And then I will go online out of curiosity and I'll be like, who's doing it right now? And I'll see it everywhere. And I know it is so insidious and it isn't obvious. And that's happening now already when there are folks and journalists who are saying, no, thank you, I'm not going to do that. But sometimes I will read a piece of music journalism that is clearly a marketed, you know, PR paid for fluff piece that is not, marketed as such. It's saying I had to sit down with so-and-so, you know, and then you read it and it's just like, this is the greatest person in the world. I mean, that is not journalism, right? That's an ad. And everything is going to be an ad. What you read is going to be an ad. What you're scrolling through is going to be an ad. You're not going to know it's an ad. You're just going to live in this context of advertised culture and art. And that is an ugly reality.
It's not the same. That's not the same. That's not the same.
It's not the same.
No, it's not the same. So lots of potential dangers continuing to slide down the slide that we are if it doesn't turn around in some way, shape, or form. Emilie, thank you very much for taking the time. And,
thank you so much.
Echoing a lot of my feelings. And again, we'll link to your work down below so people could check it out for themselves.
Support journalism. We need you. And I need you.
Thank you very much.